All right, diving in. We're tackling Wokesense today. You suggested it.
I did. It's fascinating.
Yeah, our source material is excerpts from a book.
Yeah.
Same title. Seems like it's going to be a real
Yeah.
eye-opener, you know. Claims to expose, like, the origins and the strategies and the impact of Wokesense, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a deep dive, for sure.
Now, I know this topic can get a little heated,
Oh, yeah.
but our goal here is to just understand the perspective they lay out in this book, right? Not to debate it. Just what are they saying?
Exactly.
So the book jumps right into it.
Does.
A very specific definition of Wokesense. It frames it as this set of progressive ideologies,
Okay.
actively working to challenge, even dismantle traditional values
All right.
and societal structures, all that. Like, they don't mince words.
No, they don't.
Some of the chapter titles, the woke hierarchy,
Interesting.
the woke war on families,
Wow.
the war on masculinity,
Okay.
definitely gives you a sense
The
of
direction they're going.
where they're heading.
It does, yeah.
Now, what I found really interesting is how they try to connect this woke sense
Okay.
to, like, some pretty heavy philosophical and historical ideas.
Like what?
Well, they bring up Hegel,
Hegel. Okay.
you know, the Hegelian dialectic.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Now, for anyone who hasn't, like, spent hours just staring at philosophy textbooks,
Right.
the Hegelian dialectic basically suggests that, you know, progress
Okay.
happens through this constant clash of ideas.
So, like,
Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, that whole thing.
a conflict, basically.
Yeah, conflict of ideas leading to something new.
Interesting.
So how does this Hegelian thing tie into Wokesense?
Well, the book argues that Wokesense weaponizes this whole idea of conflict.
Yeah.
So they're saying it intentionally creates division.
Oh, I see.
They're saying they break people into smaller and smaller identity groups
Okay.
to kind of disrupt unity and ultimately weaken, like, traditional institutions.
So like a divide and conquer strategy.
That's the gist of it, yeah.
Okay.
And they argue that this fragmentation, it's just one tactic
Oh,
in a much larger playbook.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Okay.
What other tactics are they describing?
One that really jumped out at me
Yeah.
is the concept of repressive tolerance.
Repressive tolerance.
Yeah.
Now, on the surface, that sounds almost like an oxymoron.
It does, yeah.
How can tolerance be repressive?
Right,
Seems like those two things would cancel each other out.
right.
But they define it, the book defines it as the silencing of dissenting opinions under the guise of inclusivity.
So you can say what you want as long as...
Yeah, it's like saying you can say whatever you want.
It's what we want you to...
as long as it's what we want you to say.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
So it's kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing situation.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
They argue that Wokesense uses this
Uh-huh.
to shut down debate.
Control the
To
narrative.
control the narrative, yeah.
All while claiming to be, like, open-minded and inclusive.
Exactly, yeah.
It's interesting how they connect this idea of repressive tolerance to things like safe spaces and trigger warnings.
Right. They present these things, which are often seen as progressive and well-intentioned.
Yeah.
They present them as tools for suppressing free speech and intellectual diversity.
So instead of fostering, like, genuine understanding and tolerance,
Yeah.
it's being used to create this environment
Right.
where only certain viewpoints are acceptable.
Exactly.
They also talk about this idea of manufacturing consent, which sounds pretty Orwellian.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They define this tactic as shaping public opinion
Oh, right.
through, like, carefully crafted narratives. The media, in the corporate world,
Okay.
they're suggesting it's not about presenting objective truth. It's about pushing a specific agenda.
So it's like a subtle form of propaganda.
That's how the book portrays it, yeah.
Yeah.
They argue that Wokesense has infiltrated these powerful institutions and uses them to, like, control the flow of information
Interesting.
and shape the way people think.
Okay, so we've got repressive tolerance.
Right.
We've got manufacturing consent. What else is in this so-called Wokesense playbook?
Well, they argue that social media plays a huge role.
Yeah?
And not just as a platform for spreading ideas, but they actually claim that Wokesense exploits the algorithms that drive social media to manipulate what people see and hear.
So it's not just about, like, posting memes and hashtags.
Right.
They're talking about manipulating the system itself.
Exactly, yeah. They suggest that Wokesense has figured out how to, like, game these algorithms
Wow.
to amplify their message
Okay.
and silence any dissenting voices.
So they're creating this kind of echo chamber
That's what they argue, yeah.
where people are only exposed to information
Right.
that confirms their existing biases.
That's their argument, yeah.
That's pretty disturbing if you think about it.
It is, yeah.
It means people might not even be aware of the full picture
Right.
or alternative viewpoints.
Exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's precisely their point.
That's what they say.
They argue that this kind of manipulation creates this false sense of consensus. Like, it makes it seem like everyone agrees with Wokesense when that might not be the case at all.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we've got these tactics,
Yeah.
but what are they ultimately trying to achieve?
Right.
What's the end goal?
That's where things get even more interesting.
All right, lay it on me.
Okay. They argue that the ultimate goal of Wokesense is to completely dismantle traditional society
Whoa.
and replace it with this new world order based on their ideology.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is.
Are they talking about like a full-blown revolution?
Well, they don't necessarily use the word revolution,
Okay.
but they definitely paint this picture of a radical transformation of society.
Yeah.
From top to bottom, they're claiming Wokesense is attacking the very foundations of our institutions, of our values, the family, religion, education, the economy, even our understanding of history and science.
They make it sound like a very deliberate, almost like orchestrated campaign.
That's the impression you get, yeah.
Yeah.
They argue that this isn't just a random collection of progressive ideas,
Right.
it's a coordinated movement
Okay.
with a very specific agenda.
So what do they say is on the chopping block? What are some of the specific areas?
Well, one of the most prominent examples they highlight is the family.
The family. Okay.
They argue that Wokesense seeks to undermine traditional family structures,
Okay.
and they portray them as like inherently patriarchal
Okay.
and oppressive.
That's a pretty strong accusation.
It is.
Do they provide any specific examples to back that up?
Yeah, they bring up things like the push for no-fault divorce,
Okay.
the questioning of traditional gender roles, and the promotion of alternative family models.
They even present like anecdotal evidence.
Oh, really?
Like there's a story about a man named John
Oh, okay.
whose life supposedly fell apart after a no-fault divorce.
So they're using this anecdote to illustrate the potential negative consequences
Exactly.
of these changes.
They argue that Wokesense often ignores or downplays the downsides of its agenda while focusing solely on, the perceived benefits.
It's interesting how they connect this attack on the family to a broader attack on masculinity.
Yes, there's a whole chapter dedicated to what they call the war on masculinity.
A war on masculinity.
Wow. They argue that Wokesense demonizes traditional masculine traits,
Right.
portrays them as toxic and dangerous.
Okay.
And they suggest that this leads to a devaluation of men
Interesting.
and the decline in their social standing.
Okay, so that's family and masculinity.
All right.
What are some of the other areas they claim are being targeted?
Well, they also go into great detail about education.
Education, okay. Arguing that Wokesense has infiltrated, like, our schools and universities, they claim that it's pushing a particular ideology that focuses on identity politics and social justice
So,
at the expense of things like critical thinking and objective truth.
do they provide any concrete examples of this,
Yeah.
like happening in the classroom?
They do. They bring up, like, the rise of safe spaces and trigger warnings, which they see as limiting free speech and intellectual exploration. And they also criticize this growing emphasis on what they call critical theories,
Critical theories.
which they argue are often used to promote this, like, divisive worldview that pits different groups against each other.
You mentioned critical theories. Could you explain those a little more for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term?
Yeah, sure. Critical theories are basically frameworks for analyzing society and culture.
Okay.
They often focus on things like power dynamics and inequality.
Right.
Now, while they can be useful tools for understanding social issues, the book argues that Wokesense often misuses these theories
Okay.
to promote a divisive agenda.
So it's not necessarily the theories themselves that are the problem.
Right.
It's how they're being applied.
Exactly. The book suggests that Wokesense takes these critical theories and uses them to create this narrative of victimhood and oppression,
Okay.
which they then use to justify their demands for, societal change.
It sounds like they see woke sense as this threat, not just to, like, our institutions,
Right.
but also to our way of thinking.
That's right. They argue that it's promoting a mindset that values emotional validation over objective truth, and that this shift has the potential to, undermine our ability to reason and think critically.
Wow, this is a lot to take in.
It is, yeah.
So far, we've covered the definition of woke sense, some of its alleged tactics,
Right.
and the areas of society it's supposedly targeting.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should know?
Well, there's one more crucial aspect
Okay.
we need to explore.
Bait it on me.
The potential consequences of this movement if it's allowed to continue unchecked.
Okay, that sounds pretty intense.
It is, but it's an important part of understanding the full scope of the argument presented in this book. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve into the potential downsides of woke sense,
Right.
as described in the source material.
Sounds like things are about to get even more interesting. We'll be back soon with part 2 of our deep dive into woke sense, where we'll examine the potential consequences of this movement and explore the author's proposed solutions.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's continue our exploration of woke sense by examining the potential consequences if this movement continues to gain traction, as outlined in our source material.
So last time we left off with this idea that woke sense is not just about promoting progressive ideas,
Right.
but rather about fundamentally transforming society
Yes.
based on a specific ideology. And frankly, the picture they painted wasn't exactly rosy.
No, not at all. The book argues that woke sense, if left unchecked, could lead to what they call a woke dystopia.
Woke dystopia.
They describe a society where individual freedom is severely restricted, traditional values are completely eradicated, and a powerful elite controls every aspect of life.
That sounds pretty intense.
It does.
What do they think will be the main drivers of this dystopia?
Well, they see a direct link between the tactics we discussed earlier,
Okay.
things like repressive tolerance and manufacturing consent,
Right.
and the erosion of individual liberties.
Okay.
They argue that as woke sense gains more power and influence, these tactics will become even more pervasive and insidious, leading to a society where people are afraid to speak their minds or challenge the prevailing ideology.
It's like that classic slippery slope argument.
Exactly.
Things start with seemingly small changes, but eventually lead to something much more drastic.
That's the idea. The book uses historical examples to illustrate this point,
Oh, really?
drawing parallels to totalitarian regimes that initially gained power by promising equality and progress,
Right.
but ultimately became oppressive and authoritarian. They argue that woke sense could follow a similar trajectory if we're not careful.
So a cautionary tale.
Very much so.
Okay, so they see a danger to individual freedom.
Yes.
What about the impact on our institutions? We talked about family and education last time. Do they go into more detail about how those might be affected in this woke dystopia?
They do. When it comes to the family, they argue that woke sense could lead to the complete disintegration of the traditional family unit as we know it.
Wow.
They envision a future where marriage is devalued, parenthood is redefined, and the government increasingly takes over the role of raising children.
That sounds pretty extreme.
It does.
Do they provide any specific examples of how this might play out?
They point to things like the rising popularity of non-traditional family structures, the push for policies that weaken parental rights, and the growing influence of government agencies in family matters. They argue that woke sense sees the traditional family as an obstacle to its vision of a more equitable society, and therefore seeks to dismantle it through a combination of social engineering and government intervention.
It's interesting how they tie this back to their argument about the war on masculinity.
Yes.
They seem to believe that this attack on traditional masculinity is directly connected to their perceived attack on the family.
Right. They argue that woke sense sees traditional masculinity as inherently patriarchal and oppressive,
Okay.
and therefore incompatible with their vision of a more egalitarian society.
So it's all connected in their view.
Very much so. They believe that by deconstructing traditional masculinity, they can weaken the family structure and pave the way for their new social order.
Okay, so they see woke sense as a threat to both the family and traditional masculinity.
Yes.
What about education? How do they see that playing out in this dystopian future?
They paint a pretty bleak picture of education in the woke dystopia. They envision a system where schools are completely indoctrinated with woke ideology,
Okay.
focusing on identity politics and social justice activism, at the expense of critical thinking, objective truth, and traditional academic subjects.
So it's not just about adding new perspectives
Yeah.
or being more inclusive. They believe it's a complete overhaul
Yes.
of the curriculum
Yeah.
and the purpose of education itself.
That's their argument. They suggest that Wokesense sees education as a tool for social engineering, a way to shape the minds of young people and mold them into the ideal citizens of their new world order.
And they see that as a negative thing, obviously.
They do.
What specifically do they object to?
They argue that this type of woke education produces a generation of students who are ill-equipped to think, critically solve problems, or engage in meaningful debate.
Interesting.
They believe it creates a culture of conformity and obedience where students are taught to accept the woke worldview without question.
They also seem concerned about the impact on free speech and academic freedom within universities.
Yes, absolutely. They argue that Wokesense creates a hostile environment for dissenting viewpoints within academia.
Okay.
They point to examples of professors being censured or even fired for expressing views that challenge the prevailing woke orthodoxy.
So it's not just about controlling what's taught in the classroom.
Right.
It's about controlling the entire intellectual climate within universities.
Exactly. They argue that this stifles intellectual inquiry and prevents the free exchange of ideas, which are essential for academic progress and a healthy democracy.
Okay, so we've talked about family masculinity and education.
Yes.
Are there any other areas where they see significant consequences from this Wokesense movement?
Yes. They also delve into the potential economic impact of this ideology.
Oh, the economic impact, okay.
They argue that Wokesense promotes policies that are harmful to economic growth and prosperity.
What kind of policies are they talking about?
They mention things like excessive regulation, high taxes, and wealth redistribution schemes. They argue that these policies disincentivize hard work, innovation, and entrepreneurship, ultimately leading to economic stagnation.
So they see a direct link between woke ideology and economic decline.
That's right. They believe that Wokesense, with its emphasis on social justice and equality of outcome, creates a culture of entitlement and dependency, which ultimately undermines the free market system.
It sounds like they're making a case for traditional capitalist values as a counterpoint to this woke economic agenda.
Exactly. They argue that a free market economy, while not perfect, provides the best opportunities for individuals to succeed based on their own merits and hard work. They believe that Wokesense threatens this system by prioritizing government control and redistribution over individual initiative and economic freedom.
Okay, so they're concerned about the impact on individual liberty, the family education, and the economy.
That's right.
Is there anything else?
Well, they also briefly touch on the potential impact of Wokesense on international relations.
International relations. Wow, they're really painting a broad picture here.
They argue that this ideology, with its focus on identity politics and social justice, weakens a nation's ability to compete on the global stage.
How so?
They argue that Wokesense promotes a sense of guilt and self-doubt about a nation's history and culture, making it less assertive and pursuing its interests abroad.
Interesting.
They also believe that this ideology can lead to a decline in military preparedness and a reluctance to use force when necessary.
So they see it as a potential national security threat as well.
That's their argument.
Right.
They believe that a nation that embraces Wokesense becomes more focused on internal divisions and social justice crusades than on protecting its interests and projecting its power in the world.
Wow, this woke dystopia sounds pretty bleak. Like, everything we value is under attack.
That's a pretty stark warning.
But they don't just leave us with this gloomy vision, do they? They offer some solutions, right?
They do. In fact, they devote a significant portion of the book to outlining what they believe are the necessary steps to counter this Wokesense movement and prevent this dystopian future from becoming reality.
So what's their plan? How do we fight back against this Wokesense?
Well, their approach is multifaceted.
Okay.
They argue that we need to be proactive on multiple fronts, intellectually, culturally, politically, and even personally.
So it's a holistic approach.
Very much so. They believe it's a battle for hearts and minds, but also for power and influence.
This sounds like a pretty comprehensive strategy.
It is.
Can you break it down for us a bit?
Yeah.
What are some of the specific things they suggest we do?
Sure. One of their key recommendations is to understand the enemy.
Understand the enemy.
They argue that we need to study the history and philosophy of Wokesense in order to effectively counter it. They believe that many people are seduced by the superficial appeal of woke ideas
Right.
without understanding their deeper implications or the ideological framework that drives them.
So it's not enough to just react emotionally to the latest outrage.
Right.
We need to be more strategic
Exactly.
and understand the intellectual underpinnings of this movement.
Yes. They also emphasize the importance of building a strong counterculture.
A counterculture.
Okay. They believe that we need to create alternative institutions, media outlets, and cultural spaces that promote traditional values
Okay.
and provide a platform for dissenting voices.
Interesting.
They see this as essential for pushing back against the dominance of woke ideology in mainstream culture.
So it's about creating our own spaces where we can express ourselves freely and promote the values we believe in.
Exactly. They argue that we can't rely on the mainstream media or traditional institutions to be fair or objective.
Right.
So we need to build our own platforms to counter their narratives and reach a wider audience.
You also talk about the importance of political action.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They believe that we need to engage in the political process to elect leaders who share our values
Yeah.
and oppose the woke agenda.
Hmm.
They argue that voting is essential. But we also need to be active in supporting candidates, donating to campaigns, and advocating for policies that align with our worldview.
So it's about using our political power to push back against the influence of Wokesense in government and policy.
Exactly. They argue that we can't afford to be complacent or disengaged from politics. We need to be active participants in shaping the future of our society.
Okay, so we've got intellectual engagement, building a counterculture, and political action.
Right.
What about on a personal level?
Yeah.
What do they suggest individuals do to resist this woke sense?
They emphasize the importance of personal responsibility and living in accordance with our values. They encourage people to be mindful of the media they consume,
Right.
to be selective about the companies they support, and to raise their children with traditional values. They argue that every individual choice we make can contribute to either reinforcing or resisting the woke agenda.
So it's about making conscious decisions in our daily lives to support the values and institutions we believe in.
Exactly. They believe that even small acts of resistance can make a difference.
I like that.
And that a critical mass of individuals living in accordance with their values can create a powerful force for change.
It sounds like they're calling for a sort of cultural awakening,
Yes.
a rejection of woke sense, and a return to traditional values.
That's a good way to put it. They believe that we're at a crossroads and that the choices we make now will determine the future of our society.
Wow.
They're calling on people to wake up to the dangers of woke sense and take action to preserve the values and institutions they hold dear.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
They have.
From the potential consequences of woke sense to the author's proposed solutions.
Yes.
Is there anything else we need to know before we move on to the next part of our deep dive?
Well, they do go into more detail about specific examples
Yeah.
of how woke sense is impacting various areas of society, from the arts and entertainment industry to the corporate world to even the medical profession.
Oh, wow.
They also offer more concrete advice on how individuals can resist woke sense in their own lives and communities.
Okay, so there's still a lot more to explore.
There is.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll delve into some of those specific examples and practical strategies for pushing back against woke sense.
Sounds good.
We'll also look at the author's overall message
Okay.
and what they hope readers will take away from this book.
Until then, we encourage you to reflect on what we've discussed so far and consider how these ideas might apply to your own life and experiences.
Okay, back for the final part of our deep dive into woke sense. We've covered a lot. We defined it, explored the impact, the solutions the author proposes. Lots to unpack.
Yeah, we've gone deep, Hegelian dialectic, woke dystopia, pretty heady stuff.
It is. But let's get practical, some real-world examples.
Exactly. How's this woke sense playing out? According to the book, of course.
Right, always sticking to the source material.
One area they focus on, entertainment, Hollywood.
Hollywood, yeah.
They argue woke sense has infiltrated it, changed the types of stories we see, the characters.
Okay, so more than just inclusion, more than diverse perspectives.
Right. It's deeper. A specific agenda, they say, sometimes at the expense of good storytelling.
Interesting.
Forced diversity, you know, where a character's race or gender, it's like their only trait, not organic to the story.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
It's everywhere. And they talk about classic works, art, literature, reinterpreted, censored, through this woke lens.
Trying to erase the past.
Kind of like those classic novels banned from schools, deemed offensive by today's standards.
Like,
They argue that erases our cultural heritage, prevents us from understanding different perspectives.
Wokesense trying to rewrite history to fit its narrative.
That's their point. Even historical figures. Reassessed, judged by today's morals. Reputations tarnished, accomplishments downplayed.
Yeah, I see that happening too. Okay, so entertainment, culture, what else?
The corporate world.
Corporations jumping on the bandwagon.
That's what they argue. Lots of woke policies and practices, but driven by fear.
Fear of.
Backlash from
Right.
activist groups. Bad press on social media.
So not genuine belief.
They say it's all about appearances. Virtue signaling. Public support for social justice. But privately, doing the opposite.
Hypocrisy.
Exactly. And it erodes trust, creates cynicism.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, entertainment, culture, corporations. Anything else?
Science and medicine.
Whoa, really?
They say Wokesense is impacting research, funding, even how doctors treat patients.
Okay, now that's a big claim. How so?
Pressure to avoid certain research topics.
Because.
Might be offensive, insensitive, even if scientifically valid, could lead to breakthroughs.
Wow.
And this focus on identity politics in medicine, they worry it leads to bias, bad treatment decisions, lower quality of care.
So ideology over science.
Potentially. They say Wokesense, with its focus on feelings, social justice, it can distort science, undermine objectivity, evidence-based practice.
Interesting. A lot of ground covered. So solutions, we touched on it, but what does the author specifically recommend?
Intellectual diversity,
Yeah.
critical thinking, create spaces for open debate, no censorship, no punishment for different opinions.
Civil discourse.
Right. Challenge the narrative, expose its flaws, be discerning about information, question the media, seek other viewpoints.
Don't be sheep.
Exactly. And support institutions, organizations that align with traditional values, donate, volunteer, build a counterculture, strong enough to push back.
Put our money where our mouth is.
Yes. And personal action, living our values, raising our kids with them, speaking out.
Even when it's tough.
Especially then, silence equals complicity. If we want change, gotta speak up. Defend what we believe in.
Big picture, what's the takeaway?
Wokesense is dangerous. A threat to society, our culture, our way of life, eroding freedoms, undermining institutions, dividing us.
Strong words.
But there's hope. If enough people wake up, take action, we can turn things around, preserve the values, principles that made our society great.
A call to action.
Absolutely. Stakes are high. The future depends on it.
Compelling case, even if it's controversial.
Sure, this book will spark debate, and that's good. Engage with different ideas. Think critically.
Well said. Anything else?
Want more? Full books out there. Amazon Kindle, Google Play Books, all the details, arguments, evidence. Dive deeper.
Great point. Okay, everyone, that wraps up our deep dive into Wokesense. Hope you found it informative, got you thinking.
Keep those minds sharp. Keep those questions coming.